Go,
The transport
my
ship
champion.
Aurora Trail
Bring
descended
peace
through the
to
thick
realm.
clouds of Vornis 7,
I shall return
a planet known for its
victorious,
tall
my
crystal
queen.
mountains and glowing purple skies. It was the capital world of the Taraxis Empire, a great alien civilization ruled by the noble Queen Alira. The empire was powerful, ancient, and proud. It did not often allow humans to step on its surface, but a rare peace agreement had made this visit possible. Among the human crew was an engineer named Reen. He was not a soldier or diplomat. He fixed things, understood machines, and preferred quiet work. His hands were rough from years of repairing engines and power grids. When others saw danger or politics, he saw wires, gears, and circuits that needed to run smoothly. He was proud of his simple work. Reen and his team had come to Vornis 7 to help install a new energy system near the royal palace. The Taraxis engineers had designed most of it, but they needed human help with stabilizing the energy field. It was a small project, yet important because it powered part of the palace defense grid. For humans, this was a chance to show trust. For the Taraxis, it was a test to see if humans were truly reliable. When the Aurora Trail landed, Reen was amazed by the beauty around him. The ground shimmered faintly underfoot as if the soil held light within. The palace in the distance rose like a mountain of silver and glass. Strange banners floated in the air, showing symbols that glowed softly in the breeze. The Taraxis guards stood tall and still, their armor reflecting the violet sky. Reen could feel their eyes on him as he walked out with his tools. He was assigned to work near the lower generator complex. The project went well at first. The human and alien engineers spoke through translation devices, their voices sounding slightly delayed but understandable. Reen was focused and calm. He double-checked every wire, every power core connection. His habit was to trust the machine before he trusted politics. As the day ended, the palace lights began to dim, signaling the coming of the twin moons. Reen was almost done when he noticed something unusual in the readings. The energy flow in one conduit was unstable. It was not his section, but he could see that if it overloaded, it might cause a surge across the entire grid. He tried to alert the Taraxis supervisor, but the alien waved it off. "System stable," the translator said in a flat voice. "No human interference needed," Reen frowned. His instincts told him something was wrong. The numbers on his display showed the buildup of static energy inside the conduit. He stepped closer to the main control column and checked the readings again. The pressure level was climbing fast. Without waiting for permission, Reen ran toward the conduit chamber. His boots hit the crystal floor hard as he moved past startled guards. He could hear alarms beginning to whine. A low hum filled the air. Then suddenly light burst from the conduit in a bright wave. The energy core exploded outward, throwing debris in all directions. Reen threw himself forward, covering a figure who stood frozen near the blast. He did not even see who it was. His body acted before his mind could think. The explosion shook the ground, and the two of them fell behind a column as fragments of metal and energy shards rained down. The air smelled of smoke and ozone. For a moment, everything went silent. Reen coughed and opened his eyes. The person he had covered was breathing, though shaken. He looked around and saw guards running toward them, shouting in the alien tongue. He lifted himself up, still dizzy from the shock. Then he froze. The woman he had protected was not a worker or guard. She wore royal silver robes and a small crown that shimmered with inner light. Her eyes, golden and calm even in shock, met his. It was Queen Alira herself, ruler of the Taraxis Empire. Reen felt his heart drop. He had just tackled the most powerful being on the planet. Before he could explain, the guards pulled him back roughly. They shouted accusations, saying he had attacked the queen. He tried to speak, but they did not listen. The translation device on his collar crackled as he shouted, "No, I saved her." The system was unstable. His voice echoed through the hall. The queen raised a hand weakly as if to stop them, but the guards followed their orders. They took Reen away and locked him inside a cold cell deep beneath the palace. His tools were taken, his communication link cut. The walls glowed faintly with blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. He sat there, confused and angry, wondering how a moment of saving someone could turn into being treated like a criminal. Hours passed. No one came. Reen sat on the floor and stared at the small control pad embedded in the wall. The air was cool, and he could hear faint echoes of machinery above him. He replayed the explosion in his mind. He knew what had gone wrong. The conduit design had a weak stabilizer core. He wanted to warn them before it happened, but now it was too late. Somewhere above, Queen Alira sat in her royal chamber, silent while her advisors argued. The nobles wanted the human punished. They said it was his presence that caused the explosion. They said humans were careless, too emotional, too dangerous. But Alira remembered the moment she was thrown to the ground. The warmth of his arm, the quick decision to shield her without hesitation. No Taraxis would have done that. Her people were trained to value hierarchy, to wait for orders, to protect the crown only when commanded. Yet this human had acted without thought of his own life. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "Find out the truth about the explosion," she said, "and keep the human alive until I decide." Her advisors bowed, though many looked displeased. Back in his cell, Reen heard the faint sound of the door unlocking. 2 guards entered, their faces hidden by masks of silver. They said nothing but gestured for him to follow. He expected punishment or interrogation. Instead, they took him through a long hallway lined with symbols that glowed in the walls. The air smelled faintly of metal and flowers. They stopped before a large set of doors that opened silently. Inside stood Queen Alira. Her robe had been replaced by a simpler garment, though still elegant. She looked at him with curiosity rather than anger. Her golden eyes were steady. "You are the human called Reen," she said, her voice clear and formal. "You were seen near the explosion." "Explain what you were doing." Reen took a breath. "The conduit was unstable," he said. "I tried to fix it before it overloaded. I didn't have time to ask for permission. When it went off, I saw you standing close and I just acted." Alira tilted her head slightly. "You acted without knowing who I was." "Yes," Reen replied. Didn't matter who it was. Someone needed help. The translator repeated his words in the Taraxis tongue. The queen was silent for a moment. Her guards shifted uneasily, unsure if she would believe him. Finally, she stepped closer and studied him. "You risked your life for a stranger," she said softly. "That is not common among my people," Reen shrugged. "Maybe, but it's common among mine." For the first time since the explosion, the queen smiled slightly. "Then perhaps humans are not as reckless as they say," she said. "You may return to your quarters until the investigation is done." Reen was taken to a guest chamber rather than a prison cell. It was still guarded, but far more comfortable. He looked around the room filled with smooth lights and transparent walls, showing the view of the city below. He was still nervous, unsure what the queen truly thought of him, but at least he was no longer locked underground. Over the next few days, the palace staff avoided him. Most Taraxis looked at him with suspicion, whispering among themselves. Reen ignored it and focused on repairing some of his damaged equipment. He wanted to prove that the explosion was not his fault. He used scraps and a borrowed scanner to analyze the energy residue still clinging to his uniform. The data confirmed his suspicion. The failure had come from a flawed stabilizer crystal, not human interference. When he sent the report to the palace engineers, they were surprised. The evidence was clear and technical. The queen herself requested to see it. She studied the readings, then called her council together. The truth became known. The failure was due to a design flaw in their own system. The human had saved her life, not endangered it. That night, the queen stood at her balcony looking out at the glowing skyline of her world. The stars above shimmered like scattered jewels. She thought about the human's quick decision, his calm words, his refusal to show fear even when surrounded by her guards. To her, that kind of courage was rare. It was not born from training or loyalty, but from instinct and heart. She whispered to herself, "Humans are strange." But there was a hint of admiration in her voice down below. In his chamber, Reen stared at the same sky. He did not know that the queen was thinking of him. He only hoped that the misunderstanding would soon end so he could return home. Yet deep inside, he felt that his life had changed. The simple mission that began as a routine repair had turned into something far greater. Somewhere in the halls of power, his name was being spoken with curiosity instead of accusation. The morning after the investigation ended, Reen was called again to the royal hall. He had barely slept. The night had been quiet but heavy with thoughts. He wondered why the queen wanted to see him again. Maybe she wanted to thank him, or maybe she wanted to question him further. Either way, he was ready to face her with honesty. 2 palace guards led him through the bright corridors. The walls of the palace were smooth like glass and glowed with gentle blue light. Reen looked around with silent wonder. Every corner of the Taraxis palace seemed to hum with energy, a mixture of beauty and power. The guard said nothing, their faces hidden behind silver masks that reflected his own tired expression. When the doors to the royal hall opened, Reen saw Queen Alira sitting on a high platform surrounded by columns of light. The air was still. Her golden eyes followed him as he walked forward. He bowed slightly, unsure of the proper greeting for a ruler of another world. The queen raised her hand gently. "You may stand, human," she said. Her voice was calm but carried authority. "You saved my life, and yet you stand before me without fear. Tell me, Reen, are all humans like you?" Reen looked up, choosing his words carefully. "Most of us try to do what's right. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." Alira studied him for a long moment. She was not used to such direct answers. Most of her advisors spoke with layers of politeness and caution. Reen's simplicity was strange but refreshing. She leaned forward slightly and asked, "Do you understand what you did that day? You touched the Queen of Taraxis. No one has ever done that." Reen blinked in surprise. "I didn't mean any disrespect," he said quickly. "I didn't even know who you were. I only saw someone in danger." The Queen's expression softened, "And yet you acted without hesitation. Even my own guards were slower." Her tone carried both amusement and curiosity. "Your kind truly values life, even that of strangers." Reen nodded. "Life is important. It doesn't matter whose it is," Alira's advisors whispered among themselves. One of them, an older Taraxis with silver patterns on his forehead, spoke sharply. "Your Majesty, the human's behavior was reckless. He broke protocol and endangered royal safety." Reen felt the tension in the room rise. He stayed silent, not wanting to anger anyone. But Alira's gaze silenced the advisor. "Enough," she said. "Without him there would be no royal safety to speak of." The advisor bowed and stepped back. Reen watched this quietly, unsure what to think. The queen dismissed the court soon after, keeping only Reen and one translator present. "I wish to learn more about you," she said when they were alone. "About humans. I have met your diplomats, but they speak like machines. You are different. You speak like someone who still feels." Reen smiled faintly. "I don't know what to say, Your Majesty. I'm just an engineer. I fix things. I'm not used to royal company." Alira stood and walked closer. Her movement was graceful, almost silent. She looked at the small translator on his collar. "Machines translate our words," she said, "but they do not translate heart. So I will speak slowly and clearly, and you will answer me honestly." "I can do that," Reen replied. The queen began asking questions. What did humans dream of? What made them fight wars? What made them explore the stars even when they knew danger waited? Reen answered as best he could. He spoke of Earth's history, of hope and mistakes, of people who chased knowledge because they wanted to know more than their own world could give. He told her that humans were fragile but determined. As he spoke, Alira listened with growing fascination. Her golden eyes stayed on his face the whole time. She had seen many ambassadors who came to flatter her empire, but this human spoke from the heart. His words were not polished, yet they carried a quiet strength. When he finished, she said softly, "Your people sound brave." Reen shrugged. "Sometimes brave, sometimes foolish. But we try." The queen smiled slightly. "That is what makes you interesting." Their talk lasted longer than expected. When the sun of Vornis began to set, its light entered the hall through the tall glass walls, painting everything in gold. Alira noticed the time and ended the meeting. "You may return to your quarters, Reen. I wish to speak again soon." Reen bowed slightly and left. As he walked back, the guards glanced at him in surprise. No common human had ever been granted such long private talk with the queen. Rumors began spreading through the palace before the night was over. During the following days, the queen called for Reen several times. Each time their talks became more relaxed. They spoke about science, art, and simple life. Reen told her about his homeworld's rain, about the sound of ocean waves, about people building homes from stone and steel. The queen told him about Vornis, about how her ancestors shaped the skies with energy towers, and how her people believed that light itself carried memories. Sometimes she asked personal questions. "Do you ever feel alone in space?" she asked one evening. Reen nodded. "Sometimes. It's quiet out there. But I think being alone helps us remember what matters." Alira looked thoughtful. "In my position, I am surrounded by people, yet I often feel alone too." "Everyone speaks to the crown, not to me." Reen hesitated, then said quietly, "Then maybe today someone spoke to you, not the crown." The queen looked at him for a long time, and a faint smile touched her lips. It was the first time anyone had said something so simple yet meaningful to her. Meanwhile, the palace nobles grew uneasy. They did not understand why the queen was giving attention to a human engineer. They whispered that he must be using tricks or lies. One of them, Lord Sareth, began to plan how to remove the human from the queen's sight. He believed that humans were a threat to Taraxis' honor. One evening, as Reen walked through the palace garden, he overheard two guards whispering about him. "The queen sees him every day," one said. "She laughs with him." "I have never heard her laugh before." The other replied, "It is strange. Maybe the human used some earth charm." Reen ignored them and continued walking. He looked up at the twin moons shining above the towers. He had never thought a simple mission would turn into this. He missed his crew, his home, and yet he felt that something important was happening here. Something he did not fully understand. The next morning, Alira invited Reen to a private workshop deep inside the palace. It was a place where few were allowed. The walls were filled with glowing crystals and ancient devices that looked like art, more than machines. She told him that the workshop once belonged to her father, who had loved building small machines for learning and healing. "I have not entered this place in years," she said, "but you reminded me of him." He also believed that technology could unite, not divide. Reen touched one of the devices gently. It was made of metal that felt warm, alive almost. "He must have been a good man." "He was," she said softly, "and he believed that courage was not born from strength but from choice." "You remind me of that." They spent hours studying the machines. Reen offered small suggestions about how to improve the energy flow. The queen listened carefully and even helped him with her own tools. For a while they worked side by side like two engineers rather than a queen and a guest. It felt strange but comfortable. When they finished, Alira looked at him seriously. "Your people are known for war, yet you build and repair. You act without waiting for orders. It is dangerous but inspiring. My advisors do not understand this kind of thinking." "Maybe it's because we know how fragile things are," Reen said. "When you fix machines, you learn that one small mistake can destroy everything. But one right decision can save it all." The queen looked at him with new respect. "Perhaps that is why the stars brought you here." Later that night, Alira sat in her chamber and thought about the human again. She remembered how he spoke, how calm he was even when surrounded by those who doubted him. Her thoughts were not just curiosity now. She felt something she could not name, something between admiration and comfort. The palace had always been filled with rules and silence, but this human had brought warmth with his presence. At the same time, Lord Sareth began to act. He gathered a few nobles who feared the queen's growing connection with the human. They planned to use the situation to weaken her rule. "If the queen trusts a human more than her own kind, she is no longer fit to lead," Sareth said. The others agreed in secret. The first step of their plan was to make the human look dangerous again. They would twist his words, spread false reports, and make it seem as if he was manipulating the queen. They knew how to control rumors, and in the palace, whispers could be sharper than blades. But Reen did not know of any of this. He only knew that the queen's curiosity was genuine, and he wanted to help her see humans as allies, not threats. He worked harder on improving the palace systems, fixing small problems before they became large. Slowly, some of the palace staff began to respect him. They saw his calm nature and began to understand why the queen trusted him. One evening, as they stood together watching the sunset from the high balcony, Alira said quietly, "You changed something in this palace." "Reen, people speak differently now." "Even I feel different," Reen smiled. "Maybe change isn't bad. Sometimes it just means things are growing." The queen turned her head toward him. The golden light of the setting sun touched her face, making her look almost human. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but growth often invites fear." The days on Vornis 7 grew tense, though the palace continued to shine with its usual beauty. The twin moons glowed over the city, reflecting in the smooth crystal towers. Inside the grand halls, however, unease spread quietly. Lord Sareth and his allies had begun moving their plans. They whispered about the human engineer who had gained the queen's favor, claiming he could manipulate her mind or influence the empire. Meanwhile, Reen continued his work. He repaired energy conduits, recalibrated old machines, and explored the inner chambers of the palace. He had learned a little of Taraxis culture from the queen herself, but he still felt like an outsider. Unlike the noble Taraxis, who always followed ceremony and protocol, Reen acted with instinct. He noticed things others overlooked, such as minor energy leaks, the timing of guards' patrols, and structural weaknesses in the palace. One afternoon, while checking a secondary generator deep in the palace basement, Reen noticed something unusual. Several energy readings were higher than they should be, fluctuating in a pattern he had seen before. He followed the data along the network of conduits and found a small room hidden behind a false wall. Inside, he discovered a group of Taraxis nobles working on a device he had never seen before. Its purpose was immediately clear to him. It was a weapon. Reen's heart raced. The device was designed to release a massive energy surge capable of destroying part of the palace. The nobles worked in secret, unaware of his presence. He realized that the weapon would be ready soon and the queen would be in danger. He crouched behind the wall, trying to think of what to do. He could not confront them directly. There were too many. And he was just a human engineer, but he could try to sabotage the device. Carefully, he examined the weapon. Its energy core was unstable, similar to the conduit he had repaired earlier. He worked quietly, using small tools to loosen connections, divert energy, and slow the device's activation sequence. Sweat formed on his forehead, but he moved steadily. The nobles continued their work, unaware that their plans were being disrupted. Finally, he finished. The weapon was temporarily disabled. Reen exhaled and wiped his hands. He knew this was only a short-term solution. If the Queen's guards discovered him, they might think he was the one building the device. He had to warn the Queen in a way that could not be misinterpreted. He returned to his quarters and began preparing a technical report. He documented the energy readings, the design of the device, and the modifications he had made to prevent immediate danger. Then he waited for the Queen's next audience, knowing that only she could act decisively. The next day, Alira called him to her chamber. "What is troubling you, Reen?" she asked, sensing his unease. Reen carefully explained what he had seen and what he had done. He spoke quickly but clearly, hoping she would understand. "Your Majesty, there is a weapon in the palace. It is hidden and it could cause great harm. I disabled it for now, but it is not a permanent fix. You must investigate." Alira's golden eyes widened. "You did this alone?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Reen said. "I could not wait. I had to act, but I need your help to stop the rest." The Queen stood silent for a moment, then nodded. "You have proven your courage and your loyalty, Reen. I will not ignore this. We must act together." She summoned her most trusted guards and a few loyal advisors. "The humans may not understand our customs," she said quietly, "but they understand life and danger." Reen's warning must be taken seriously. While Alira organized a team to investigate, Reen stayed nearby to guide them. They entered the hidden room and found the weapon just as he had described. The nobles working on it tried to deny involvement, claiming ignorance, but the evidence was undeniable. Alira's voice was firm as she addressed them. "You have endangered the life of your queen and the security of this empire. Your actions are a betrayal." The conspirators were arrested immediately. The palace guards worked efficiently, escorting them to secure cells. Reen felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. He had stopped a threat that could have caused devastation. Yet he also realized that the incident had drawn attention to him, and not all of it would be positive. Later, alone with the Queen, Reen hesitated. "Your Majesty, I did what I could, but this may not be the last threat. Others may try something similar." Alira placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, Reen, but your actions today show me that humans have a strength we often overlook. You act with instinct, with courage, and with loyalty. That is something my own people sometimes forget." Reen looked at her, unsure how to respond. He was not used to praise from royalty. "I did what I thought was right," he said simply. "That is enough," she replied. Sometimes one person's decision changes everything. Over the next few weeks, Reen worked closely with the Queen. He helped reorganize the palace security, improved energy systems, and advised on technology that could prevent future attacks. His role grew not because of ambition, but because the Queen trusted him. Yet tension in the palace did not disappear. Lord Sareth and his followers whispered in secret, plotting how to undermine both the human and the Queen. They claimed that her favor toward Reen was dangerous. They feared change, and they feared that the Queen could see value in a human beyond his service. Despite this, Alira continued her private meetings with Reen. She asked questions about human society, their courage and their ways of thinking. Reen spoke honestly, sometimes telling stories from Earth about people who faced impossible challenges and yet persisted. The Queen listened intently, absorbing everything. One evening, they walked together through the palace gardens. The air was cool and the twin moons shone brightly above. Reen showed her how to repair a small water device, and she laughed when it splashed unexpectedly. For a brief moment, there was no hierarchy, no tension, no palace politics, just two beings learning from each other. Alira paused and looked at him. "You remind me that courage is not about titles or strength," she said softly. "It is about choice. And today your choice has saved many lives." Reen felt a strange warmth at her words. He had never sought recognition, yet hearing this from her made him understand that his actions mattered. "I only did what I had to," he said quietly. "The right action is always worth acknowledging," Alira replied. The days passed, and the human's presence became a quiet but important part of palace life. Some nobles began to accept him, seeing that his intelligence and courage had prevented disaster. Others, like Lord Sareth, continued plotting. They could not ignore the fact that a human now held influence in the palace, and that influence threatened their control. Meanwhile, Reen and the Queen grew closer in understanding. She began to see the human perspective on problem-solving, courage, and loyalty. Reen saw the Queen not just as a ruler, but as a person with responsibilities and pressures, unlike anything on Earth. Each meeting strengthened their trust. One night, Alira called him to the balcony. The city below glittered like a field of stars, and the wind carried the faint hum of palace energy systems. "Reen," she said, "you have taught me something important. Bravery does not always come from training. Sometimes it comes from the heart. And the heart can belong to anyone, regardless of species." Reen looked at her, unsure of how to respond. The words were simple, yet carried weight. He had only intended to help, yet he realized that the trust between them had begun to grow into something more than duty. At the same time, the conspirators remained locked in secure cells, planning silently. Lord Sareth had not given up. He watched the human with suspicion and resentment. He whispered to his allies, "The Queen is blind to danger. That human has become more than a guest. He has become a threat to our traditions." Reen, however, remained unaware of the plots brewing. He focused on fixing what he could, helping those who needed it, and learning more about the Taraxis ways. Each day he earned small respect from the guards and staff, not through authority but through actions that proved his integrity. By the end of the week, the Queen invited him to her personal library. Ancient scrolls and crystals glowed softly around them. She asked about human philosophies and ethics, and he explained how humans valued life, courage, and trust. She listened, fascinated, absorbing every detail. "Your people have a unique way of seeing the world," she said. "Perhaps it is why you act as you do. You see the potential in what others might ignore." "That is rare," Reen nodded. "I suppose it is. But perhaps every species has the same courage inside. Some just do not recognize it until it is needed." Alira smiled. "Then perhaps that is why you were here, Reen. To remind me and my people that courage is not limited by species or rank." The human's presence in the palace had begun as an accident, an incident that might have been forgotten. Instead, it had grown into a bond that neither of them fully understood yet. They worked, learned, and began to trust each other in ways that even the most seasoned Taraxis advisors could not predict. And yet, beyond the palace walls, shadows were gathering. Lord Sareth's plans were not finished, and other nobles who feared change were watching. The Empire would soon face tests not only of strength but of loyalty, trust, and the courage that one human had quietly inspired. Reen did not know what the future held. All he knew was that he would continue to do what was right, even if it meant facing dangers greater than any he had imagined. For the palace of Vornis 7 was alive with tension. Even after the failed conspiracy, whispers among the nobles did not cease. Lord Sareth and his followers had been silenced for now, but the fear of change lingered in their hearts. The Queen walked through the marble corridors with purpose, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. Reen walked beside her, carrying a small set of repair tools. He had become more than an engineer in the eyes of the Queen. He had become a partner in guarding her world. Alira had spent the morning discussing plans for palace defense and energy systems, but her mind kept returning to the human beside her. She saw how calm he remained even when nobles questioned his loyalty. She remembered the courage that had saved her life during the initial incident, and she realized that courage was rare among her own people. It was not skill or ceremony that mattered, but instinct, heart, and a willingness to act when others hesitated. Later in the afternoon, the queen called for her council. She entered the grand hall with Reen following. The nobles present had hardened expressions. Many of them still whispered about the human engineer. Some avoided eye contact, while others stared openly, trying to challenge his place in the palace. "Your Majesty," Lord Sareth said, his voice measured but sharp. "This human's presence among us undermines the traditions of the Tyraxis Empire. A human has no right to influence matters of state." Alira turned toward him, her golden eyes steady and unyielding. "Reen is not here to undermine anyone. He is here to serve and protect, and his actions have proven that his loyalty is true." Sareth stiffened but continued. "Even so, it is dangerous to place trust in one who is not of this world. What if his decisions endanger us further?" Reen stepped forward calmly, addressing the council. "I have never sought power only to prevent harm. I acted because danger was present. I would do the same tomorrow if needed. The people of this empire do not owe me anything, and I owe them nothing but caution and care. My goal has always been simple: safety for those who cannot protect themselves." The room fell silent. Even the guards seemed to pause, listening to a human speak with clarity and honesty. Alira's expression softened as she looked at him. "Do you see now why I trust him?" she asked the council. Sareth opened his mouth but could not find words. Alira continued. "Reen has proven himself not only with action but with thought. He does not act for glory, wealth, or recognition. He acts because it is the right choice." The council murmured. Some tried to argue, but the queen raised her hand. "Your arguments no longer matter. Reen will remain in my service. If anyone acts against this decision, they will face the consequences of treason." With that, the meeting ended. The nobles bowed formally, though their resentment was clear. Reen followed the queen out, silently relieved. He had never sought recognition or conflict, yet he understood the gravity of what had just happened. By standing for truth and loyalty, he had secured a place not only in the queen's presence but in the palace itself. Later that evening, Alira invited Reen to the royal balcony. The city below glowed under the twin moons. Crystal towers reflected light like scattered jewels. The air was calm, and a gentle wind carried the scent of rare flowers from the palace gardens. "Reen," Alira began, "you have changed many things in this palace, not with force but with courage and loyalty. You remind me that leadership is not only about rules or ceremony, it is about the choices we make when no one else dares to act." Reen looked out at the horizon, trying to find the right words. "I only do what seems right in the moment. I do not think of titles or rewards. I act because someone needs help." The queen studied him, her gaze steady. "That is why I want you by my side. Not as a guest or an advisor alone, but as someone I can rely on in every decision. Your perspective, your courage, and your loyalty matter to me more than you realize." Reen felt a mix of honor and hesitation. "Your Majesty, I am just an engineer. I have no experience in ruling or court politics. I am not sure I am worthy of standing beside you in such a role." Alira smiled softly. "Worth is measured not by title or birth, but by action and integrity. You have already proven your worth. I ask you not to think of this as power or position, but as trust. Will you stay with me?" Reen took a deep breath. He thought of the many challenges he had faced in the palace: the explosion, the sabotage, the hidden weapon. Each moment had tested him, yet he had acted without hesitation. He realized that this was not about ambition, but about commitment. "I will stay," he said finally. "Not for power, but because it is right." The queen nodded, and for the first time, the palace seemed lighter. The tension that had lingered in the halls began to ease. Even the guards, who had watched him closely, seemed to relax slightly. They understood that this human was no ordinary guest. Over the next few days, Reen's role grew naturally. He walked with the queen as she inspected the palace, advised on security measures, and helped with technological improvements. Yet their relationship was not formal. In private moments, they spoke freely about life, courage, and the future of the empire. Alira shared her thoughts and fears with him, trusting his judgment. Reen offered practical advice and quiet encouragement, never seeking credit. One afternoon, while repairing a small energy conduit in the palace corridors, Reen was approached by a young guard. "Sir," the guard said nervously, "some nobles are still unhappy with your presence. They whisper about plots against you and the queen." Reen listened carefully, nodding. "Thank you for letting me know. We must remain cautious, but we cannot let fear control our actions. The best way to prevent danger is to act with clarity and honesty." The guard looked impressed. "I will remember that, sir." That night, Alira invited Reen to dine with her privately. The room was warm, lit by soft crystals that glowed like stars. They ate simple food, discussing strategy, repairs, and the stories of Earth. Alira laughed for the first time in weeks, the sound gentle and musical. "You have brought light to this palace," she said softly. "Even in small ways, your presence has reminded me that life is more than duty and protocol." Reen smiled faintly. "I did nothing extraordinary. I simply did what I could." Alira shook her head. "Extraordinary is when someone chooses to act even when the world doubts them. That is what you have done." The weeks passed, and the bond between the queen and Reen strengthened. They trained together, planned together, and shared quiet moments of thought and conversation. Alira began to rely on his perspective, not just for technology or safety, but for clarity of mind. She realized that his view of the world was refreshingly honest, free from the fears and politics that bound her other advisors. However, outside the palace, Lord Sareth's plans had not ended. He and his followers whispered in secret chambers, plotting ways to undermine the queen's trust in the human engineer. They hoped to create a misunderstanding or frame him for a mistake. Their jealousy and fear of change fueled their schemes. One night, Reen was working on a calibration device when he overheard whispers from the corridor. He stepped quietly to listen. "The queen cannot be allowed to trust a human like him," one voice said. "He may teach her to forget tradition, and our power will fade." Reen retreated silently, knowing that he could not confront them without proof. He would continue his work, act carefully, and let the queen's judgment guide the outcome. He had learned that courage was not only about bold action, but also patience and strategy. Alira noticed his quiet concern and asked later, "Are you worried about them?" "I am cautious," he admitted. "They still seek to harm the queen or the palace, but we cannot act out of fear. We must act with knowledge and care." The queen nodded. "You remind me that courage is both action and wisdom. I will trust your judgment." Days turned into weeks. The conspirators remained under watch, their influence slowly diminishing. The palace grew safer, and Reen's presence became accepted not just by the queen, but by other trusted staff. The palace halls, once tense with fear and suspicion, began to feel alive again. One evening, Alira invited Reen to the palace terrace. The city below shimmered with soft lights, and the twin moons hung like glowing orbs. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and something deeper. "Reen," she said softly, "I have made my choice. I trust you, not as a visitor or a worker, but as someone I wish to have beside me always. Your courage, loyalty, and honesty have earned a place in my life and in this palace." Reen felt a weight lift from his chest. He had faced danger, suspicion, and political intrigue, yet now he realized that his actions had not gone unnoticed. The queen's trust was not given lightly, and he vowed silently to protect it and her, no matter what challenges came next. The shadows beyond the palace walls still lingered, But within the palace, a quiet strength had emerged. The human engineer and the queen of the Tyraxis Empire had formed a bond that would shape the future. And as the moon shone above, both of them understood that the coming days would test not only courage but trust, loyalty, and the choices that define greatness. The days that followed the queen's decision were filled with careful balance. Reen had become more than an engineer. He was now a trusted companion to Queen Alira. His presence beside the throne was unusual, but it brought a new energy to the palace. Guards, staff, and even some nobles began to notice the difference. Where once there had been tension and suspicion, there was now respect. Even as he worked on palace technology and security, Reen found himself drawn into decisions that shaped the empire. He helped Alira reorganize the palace defenses, improve communication networks, and stabilize the energy fields that powered the city. Yet he was careful not to overstep. He acted not for recognition but because it was necessary. Alira valued his perspective. She had seen her advisors speak in layers of caution and diplomacy, often avoiding bold choices. Reen's advice was direct and honest. He pointed out weaknesses in plans, suggested simple solutions, and reminded the queen that courage often required action over ceremony. One morning, the queen summoned him to the royal observatory. The large glass dome allowed a view of the twin moons and distant stars. Reen entered carrying a data tablet. "Reen," Alira said, her voice calm yet strong, "you have changed much in this palace and in my life. I have seen loyalty, courage, and wisdom in someone I never expected. It is time to plan for the future of the empire with this trust in mind." Reen nodded. "Your Majesty, we can strengthen defenses and improve systems. But the people must also understand that courage and loyalty are not bound by blood or title. They exist wherever someone chooses to act rightly." Alira smiled. "You are correct. That is why I will allow you a more permanent place beside me. Your presence will not be temporary or symbolic. You will be a partner in decisions and a witness to the actions that shape the empire." The words felt weighty to Reen. He had never sought such responsibility, yet he understood that his role was now greater than he could have imagined. "I will do my best," he said quietly. "Always." Their partnership quickly became a symbol of unity and hope. Citizens heard stories of the human who had saved the queen and worked alongside her. Many were inspired by the courage and trust displayed. Even skeptics began to soften, realizing that strength could be found in unexpected places. But not all threats had ended. Lord Sareth and a few remaining nobles had not given up. They watched Reen and the queen, hoping for a mistake or a misstep. Yet every attempt at sabotage or manipulation failed. Reen's attention to detail and Alira's decisive leadership prevented disaster. Their combined strength began to discourage those who opposed them. One day, Reen noticed unusual readings from the energy conduits in the lower palace. They indicated a minor malfunction that could escalate if left unchecked. He called for a small team and quickly resolved the issue. Alira observed silently as he worked. "Even the smallest details matter," she said. "Your care has saved the palace countless times without the world noticing." Reen glanced at her. "I only do what needs to be done. That is how things stay safe." The queen nodded, understanding more than she had in the beginning. "And that is why you are here beside me. Not for glory, but for what is right." The months passed and their bond grew stronger. Reen learned about Tyraxis' history, philosophy, and the ways of the empire. He shared human stories, tales of courage, survival, and kindness. Alira found wisdom in his words, sometimes in ways she had not expected. They would walk through the palace gardens at night discussing ideas freely, without ceremony or hierarchy. One evening, Alira led Reen to the highest balcony. The city below glittered like a sea of light, and the twin moons shone brightly above. The air was calm, carrying the scent of rare blossoms from the garden. "Reen," she said softly, "you have shown me that courage, loyalty, and wisdom can come from anywhere. You remind me that being a leader is not only about power, but about understanding, trust, and action. You have earned a place beside me in more ways than one." Reen looked at her, the words touching him deeply. "I never expected to be here, Your Majesty. I only did what I thought was right. And that is why you are worthy," she replied. "Because you act from the heart, not for titles or recognition. That is rare among both humans and Tyraxis." As they stood together, the moons reflecting light across the city, a soft breeze carried a sense of peace. For the first time in many months, the palace felt calm. The conspiracies had been exposed, the threats neutralized, and the trust between human and queen had grown unbreakable. Reen's work continued, but it was no longer only about technology. He advised on decisions, helped interpret threats, and reminded the queen that courage often required action before fear. Together, they navigated both the dangers and opportunities that came with ruling an empire. The citizens of Vornis 7 began to speak of the human beside the queen. They admired his courage, honesty, and calm presence. Children told stories of a brave human who saved the queen, while elders spoke of the lessons he taught about loyalty and integrity. Even the palace guards, who had once been suspicious, now respected him as an example of honor. One night, as the palace grew quiet, Alira invited Reen to the terrace again. The twin moons shone brightly, their light casting gentle shadows across the walls. The city below was peaceful, calm after months of tension. "You have changed this palace and perhaps this empire," she said softly. "But more than that, you have changed me. You have reminded me what it means to trust, to act with courage, and to see beyond fear and tradition." Reen was quiet for a moment. He had never expected such words, and they filled him with a mixture of humility and pride. "I only did what I thought was right," he said simply. "Right actions are not simple," Alira replied. "They carry meaning, and your meaning is clear to me." From that night onward, the queen asked Reen to remain beside her not only during the day but at night as well. His presence became a constant source of comfort and guidance. Together they discussed plans, strategies, and ideas late into the night. Their bond became a quiet strength, known only to them and a few trusted advisors. The remaining nobles realized that their attempts to undermine the queen had failed. Lord Sareth and his followers had been quietly removed from positions of influence. The empire began to change, slowly but steadily, under the guidance of both queen and human. They learned that courage and loyalty mattered more than titles, tradition, or fear. Reen continued his work with quiet dedication. He fixed, repaired, and improved the systems of the palace, but he also guided the queen, offering advice and perspective that no Taraxis advisor could provide. Together, they made decisions that strengthened the empire and built bridges between worlds. One evening, Alira asked Reen to join her at the highest observation deck. The stars above stretched endlessly, and the twin moons shone like silver sentinels. "Reen," she said, "you have taught me much. You have shown me the value of courage, honesty, and loyalty, and for that I want you to remain beside me always. Not only for your skills, but because your presence reminds me of what is truly important." Reen looked at her and nodded. "I will stay, Your Majesty. Always." And so, what began as a single incident, a human rushing to protect a queen during an unexpected explosion, had grown into something far greater. Reen had earned trust, respect, and a permanent place beside the throne. Together, he and Alira shaped the empire with courage, wisdom, and integrity. From that day forward, every night in the palace, Reen stood beside the queen, not as a subject or an outsider, but as a companion and advisor. They watched the stars, discussed the future, and faced challenges together. The citizens of Vornis 7 saw a new era of hope and unity. A single human, guided by instinct, courage, and heart, had changed the course of an empire. And the queen, who had learned to trust beyond rank and tradition, had found in him a presence that was both steady and inspiring. In the end, the incident that began as a chaotic moment had become a story of loyalty, courage, and the strength that one human could bring to an entire world. It was a reminder that trust, action, and heart could change destinies, unite worlds, and create a future that no one could have imagined. As the twin moons rose high over the city, Queen Alira and Reen stood together watching the stars. The palace was quiet, the empire was strong, and the bond between human and queen was unbroken. Together they faced the future, not as ruler and guest, but as partners in courage, trust, and hope. And so, what began as an accident became legend, whispered across the halls of the palace, the streets of the city, and eventually among the stars themselves. A human had saved a queen, earned her trust, and remained by her side. The story of courage, choice, and loyalty would live on for generations to come.